The howling wind carried Alina Harlow's desperate screams into the night, but no one in Opal, Wyoming, would open their doors. The year was 1883, and the temperature had plunged well below freezing as the worst blizzard in decades descended upon the remote mining settlement. 22-year-old Hannah Kovacs stumbled through knee-deep snow, her threadbare coat offering little protection against the merciless cold. Her fingers had long since gone numb, and her tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. "Please," she cried out, pounding on yet another door. "I need help." But like all the others, this one remained firmly shut. Behind the frosted windows, she could see shadows moving, people hearing her pleas and deliberately turning away. Hannah had only arrived in Opal 3 months earlier, having traveled west from Philadelphia after her parents' death from consumption, left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. The promise of work at the new hotel had drawn her to this place, but everything had changed when Warren Blackfield, the town's wealthiest businessman and owner of both the silver mine and the hotel, had taken an interest in her. His advances had been unwelcome, his touch making her skin crawl. When she'd refused him publicly, calling him a lecherous old goat in front of the entire saloon, his face had darkened with rage. Within a day, she'd lost her job, her room, and found herself labeled a troublemaker, a liar, and worse. Blackfield's influence ran deep in Opal. He controlled the jobs, the housing, and even, it seemed, the townspeople's hearts. Now, as the deadly winter night tightened its grip, Hannah knew she would not survive until morning. Her strength was failing, each step more difficult than the last. When she reached the edge of town, she saw a small, abandoned miner's shack sitting alone against the backdrop of snow-covered pines. It was her last hope. She used the last of her energy to force open the frozen door, collapsing inside the frigid interior. There was no wood, no blankets, nothing that might save her. Hannah curled into herself in the corner, shivering violently, and prepared to die alone in a town that had turned its back on her. Miles away, Jackson Norwood urged his horse through the blinding snow. At 30 years old, Jack had seen his share of harsh winters on the frontier, but this storm was different, a killer that had descended with unexpected fury. He'd been on his way back to his ranch after delivering a herd of cattle to Cheyenne when the blizzard caught him, forcing him to seek shelter in the nearest town. Jack had never much cared for Opal. The mining town had a mean streak that ran as deep as the silver veins beneath it. But it was Opal or death in this weather, and he wasn't quite ready to meet his maker. His horse, Thunder, snorted in protest as they trudged through the deepening snow. "Just a little farther, boy," Jack encouraged, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. The lights of Opal flickered in the distance like uncertain stars. When he finally reached the town, Jack headed straight for the livery stable. The owner, an old-timer named Pete, reluctantly opened the doors. "Wouldn't be out in this weather myself," Pete grumbled, eyeing Jack suspiciously. "Didn't have much choice," Jack replied, dismounting and leading Thunder inside. The blessed warmth of the stable enveloped him, and he removed his ice-crusted gloves. "You heading to the hotel?" Pete asked. "That's the plan," Pete snorted. "Good luck with that." "Blackfield don't take kindly to drifters these days," Jack frowned. "Since when? Money's money." "Since he's been in a mood fouler than this storm. Some girl rejected him, made him look a fool, and now he's making everyone pay for it." Pete shook his head. "Had her thrown out of town today." "Right into the blizzard." Jack's head snapped up. "He did what?" "You heard me. Pretty young thing too, Eastern by her accent. Nobody would take her in, too afraid of crossing Blackfield." "And everyone just let this happen?" Jack demanded, anger rising in his chest. Pete looked away, shame evident in his weathered face. "It ain't right, but Blackfield owns this town and folks got families to feed." "Which way did she go?" "What's it to you?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "Which way, Pete?" The old man sighed. "Last I saw, she was heading toward the old mining cabins on the north edge of town." Without another word, Jack grabbed a lantern and strode back out into the storm, ignoring Pete's protests. The wind cut through his heavy coat like a knife, and he could only imagine what it was doing to a woman without proper protection. He cursed Blackfield and the cowardice of the townspeople under his breath as he trudged through the snow-choked streets. At the northern edge of town, several abandoned miners' cabins stood like ghosts in the swirling snow. Jack checked each one, pushing open frozen doors until he reached the last cabin. The door was slightly ajar, and when he pushed it open, his lantern illuminated a small, huddled form in the corner. "Hello," he called, approaching cautiously. When she didn't respond, a spike of fear drove through him. He knelt beside her and gently turned her face toward the light. She was young and would have been beautiful if her lips weren't blue with cold, her skin pale as the snow outside. "Miss, can you hear me?" Jack touched her cheek and found it ice cold. She was alive, but barely, her breathing shallow and her pulse weak. Jack knew she wouldn't last much longer without warmth. With quick, practiced movements, he gathered what little broken furniture remained in the cabin and piled it near the small stone fireplace. From his saddlebag, he pulled flint, steel, and a small pouch of tinder that he always carried. Within minutes, he had a small fire blazing. He returned to the woman, lifted her gently, and carried her closer to the fire. Her eyelids fluttered and a soft moan escaped her lips. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe." Her eyes opened, revealing irises the color of summer violets. "Who?" She whispered through cracked lips. "Name's Jackson Norwood. Jack, I'm going to help you." Fear suddenly filled her eyes. "Blackfield, he'll—" "Blackfield's not here," Jack assured her. "And he won't hurt you again." "What's your name?" "Hannah," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Hannah Kovacs." "Well, Miss Kovacs, you hang on. I'm going to get you warm." Jack removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then set about building up the fire. He knew the cabin wouldn't be enough. It was too drafty, too exposed, but it would have to do until the storm eased. He pulled emergency supplies from his saddlebags. Jerky, a flask of whiskey, a small pot for melting snow into water, and a tattered blanket he used for thunder on cold nights. As Hannah drifted in and out of consciousness, Jack worked tirelessly, boarding up broken windows with pieces of abandoned furniture, packing snow against the outside walls for insulation, and keeping the fire fed. By the time dawn broke, he had transformed the derelict cabin into a shelter that, while far from comfortable, would keep them alive. Hannah woke to the smell of something cooking. She opened her eyes to see Jack crouched by the fire, stirring a pot of what looked like thin stew. "Good morning," he said, noticing her watching him. "Hungry," Hannah tried to sit up and winced. Every muscle in her body ached, and her fingers and toes burned painfully as circulation returned. "Easy," Jack said, coming to her side. "Frostbite's nothing to trifle with. How long have I been?" "About 12 hours. Storm's still raging, but we're safe enough in here for now." Hannah looked around at the transformed cabin. "You did all this," Jack shrugged. "Just basic survival. Been caught in blizzards before." "Thank you," Hannah said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was going to die." "You nearly did." Jack's expression darkened. "Pete at the livery told me what Blackfield did. That man deserves a bullet." Hannah looked away. "He told everyone I was a thief, that I tried to seduce him for money. No one would believe me over him." Jack handed her a tin cup of the stew. It was simple jerky boiled with a few herbs he carried, but it was hot. "Eat. Get your strength back. Then we can figure out what comes next." Hannah accepted the cup gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "There is no next for me. I can't go back to town, and I have nowhere else to go." "Let's worry about surviving this storm first," Jack said. "Then we'll tackle the rest." For 3 days, the blizzard held them captive in the small cabin. Jack ventured out only to gather more wood and check on Thunder, who he'd moved to a lean-to he'd constructed against the cabin's southern wall. During those days, Hannah and Jack talked, at first hesitantly, then with growing ease. Hannah told him about her life in Philadelphia, about the death of her parents and her journey west. Jack spoke of his ranch, 50 miles west of Opal, where he raised cattle and broke horses. He had been alone since his wife died in childbirth 5 years earlier, taking their unborn son with her. "I'm sorry," Hannah said softly when he told her this. Jack stared into the fire. "For a long time, I didn't think I'd survive it, but somehow you keep going." On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. Jack stood in the doorway, surveying the damage. "Town's going to be dug in for days," he observed. "But we should be able to make it to my ranch once the trail clears a bit." Hannah joined him at the door. "Your ranch, unless you've got someplace else in mind." Hannah hesitated. I can't impose on you any further, Mr. Norwood. Jack, he corrected. And it's no imposition. I've got plenty of room and you need somewhere to recover properly before deciding on your next move. But what will people think? Jack's expression hardened. I've never much cared what people think, Miss Kovacs, and after what this town did to you, I'd say their opinions matter even less. Hannah considered his words. The truth was, she had nowhere else to go, no money and no prospects. And there was something about Jackson Norwood, a quiet strength, an unwavering decency that made her trust him despite her recent experiences with men. All right, she agreed finally. But only until I can find work somewhere. Jack nodded, satisfied. We'll head out tomorrow then. The next morning dawned clear and blindingly bright. Jack had managed to find an old sled behind one of the other cabins, and he'd spent the evening repairing it. Hannah would ride Thunder, and the sled would carry their meager supplies. As they prepared to leave, Hannah looked back at the small cabin that had been their shelter. I never thought I'd be grateful for this place, she said quietly. Sometimes salvation comes from unexpected quarters, Jack replied, helping her onto Thunder's back. Ready. Hannah nodded, pulling Jack's borrowed coat tighter around her. She was wearing men's clothes pants and a shirt that Jack had in his saddlebags, which were far too large but warmer than her ruined dress. They had just started toward the trail leading out of town when a voice called out, Norwood. Hold up there. Jack turned to see Sheriff Davis approaching, his boots crunching in the snow. The sheriff was a thin man with a perpetually worried expression, known throughout the county for avoiding conflict whenever possible. Morning, Sheriff, Jack said coldly. Something you need. Davis eyed Hannah, recognition dawning in his eyes. I see you found our troublemaker. Jack's hand moved instinctively toward his holstered revolver. Careful with your next words, Davis. The sheriff raised his hands placatingly. Now, I'm just doing my job. Mr. Blackfield has some serious accusations against this young woman. Accusations that conveniently came after she refused his advances, Jack said. Funny how that works. Davis had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not for me to say. But I can't let you take her out of town until this is resolved. Hannah felt fear rise in her throat if she was forced to return to Opal to face Blackfield again. Sheriff, Jack said, his voice dangerously calm, you and this entire town left this woman to die in a blizzard. By my reckoning, that makes you all guilty of attempted murder, Davis paled. Now that's not fair. What's not fair is standing by while an innocent woman freezes to death because some rich bastard couldn't handle rejection. Jack's eyes narrowed. So here's what's going to happen. Miss Kovacs is coming with me to my ranch to recover from her ordeal. If Blackfield has legitimate charges, he can bring them to Judge Wilson next month when he makes his circuit. Until then, she's under my protection. The sheriff hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to Blackfield and the truth of Jack's accusations. Finally, he stepped back. I'll tell him you said that. You do that, Jack replied. And remind him that unlike the people in this town, I don't fear him or his money. Without waiting for a response, Jack turned and began leading Thunder down the trail, Hannah perched on the horse's back. She waited until they were well clear of town before speaking. He won't let this go, she said quietly. Blackfield, I mean. Jack glanced up at her. No, I don't expect he will, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. They traveled slowly through the deep snow, Jack breaking trail on foot while Hannah rode. The journey that would normally take a day stretched into 3 as they navigated the snow-choked passes and valleys. They camped under the stars, Jack always maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring Hannah stayed warm. On the evening of the 3rd day, Jack pointed ahead to where the trail dipped into a sheltered valley. There it is, Norwood Ranch. Hannah gazed down at the sprawling property below. A large main house built of sturdy logs stood surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. Even under a blanket of snow, it had a welcoming appearance, with smoke curling from the chimney. It's beautiful, Hannah said, genuine admiration in her voice. Jack's face softened with pride. Built most of it with my own hands. It's not fancy, but it's home. As they approached, a large man emerged from the barn, waving enthusiastically. Jack, about time you showed up. Was about to send out a search party. Hank, Jack called back. Good to see you kept the place standing. Hank was Jack's foreman, a burly former blacksmith with a booming laugh and perpetually dirty fingernails. He raised an eyebrow at the sight of Hannah, but to his credit, asked no questions as Jack helped her down from Thunder. "Miss Hannah Kovacs, this is Hank Miller, the best foreman west of the Mississippi," Jack introduced them. "Hank, Miss Kovacs will be staying with us for a while." Hank tipped his hat. "Madam, pleasure to meet you." "Likewise, Mr. Miller," Hannah replied, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance, unwashed, wearing men's clothes, exhausted from the journey. "Hank, get Thunder settled, would you? I'm going to show Miss Kovacs to the house." As they walked toward the main building, Hannah whispered, "You didn't tell him." "Your story is yours to tell or not, as you choose," Jack said simply. Hank's not one to pry anyway. The interior of the house was surprisingly welcoming. Though clearly a bachelor's residence, it was clean and well-maintained, with solid, handcrafted furniture and colorful Navajo rugs covering the plank floors. A fire roared in the large stone fireplace, and the smell of coffee filled the air. "Rosa must have kept it warm for us," Jack explained, helping Hannah remove her coat. "She's our cook, comes up from the Mexican settlement twice a week. Best tamales you'll ever taste." He showed her to a bedroom off the main living area. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large bed covered in handmade quilts and a window overlooking the snow-covered valley. "This was my wife's sewing room," Jack said quietly. "I had Hank move a bed in here after. Well, it seems a shame to waste the space." Hannah felt a lump form in her throat at his matter-of-fact kindness. "Thank you, Jack, for everything," he nodded, suddenly awkward. "I'll, give you some privacy. There's a wash basin there, and I'll have Hank bring up some hot water." "Rosa left some clothes that might fit you better than mine. Her niece stays here sometimes." After he left, Hannah sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past week. From the brink of death to this haven of safety, all because a stranger had chosen to build a fire at her door when an entire town had turned its back. The days at Norwood Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Hannah recovered her strength quickly, helped by Rosa's hearty cooking and the peaceful atmosphere of the ranch. She insisted on making herself useful, helping with the cooking and cleaning, mending clothes, and even learning to collect eggs from the chicken coop without getting pecked, a skill that proved more challenging than she'd anticipated. Jack spent his days tending to the ranch, which ran with surprising efficiency despite the winter weather. He had 8 ranch hands besides Hank, though most lived in the bunkhouse and kept to themselves. In the evenings, he would join Hannah by the fire, where they would talk, read, or simply enjoy the comfortable silence. 2 weeks after their arrival, Hannah was in the kitchen helping Rosa prepare dinner when Jack entered, snow dusting his shoulders. "Mail came through," he announced, holding up several letters. "And news from town." Hannah tensed. "What news?" Jack's expression was grim. "Blackfield's been asking questions, offering rewards for information about where you've gone." Rosa muttered something in Spanish that sounded distinctly uncomplimentary. "He won't give up, will he?" Hannah said, setting down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "Men like Blackfield don't take kindly to being thwarted," Jack replied. "But you're safe here, Hannah. I promise you that." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Over the past weeks, she had come to see Jackson Norwood not just as her rescuer, but as a man of exceptional character, gentle despite his rugged exterior, thoughtful despite his taciturn nature. And she had to admit, increasingly attractive to her in ways that both excited and frightened her. "I can't hide here forever," she said softly. "I need to make a plan, find work somewhere." Jack frowned. "There's no rush, winter's barely half over." "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "In fact, Rosa says you're the best help she's had in years." Rosa nodded emphatically. "Es verdad. The men, they make more mess than they clean." Hannah smiled at the older woman's assessment but remained troubled. "Even so, I need to think about my future." Jack hesitated, then said, "We can talk about it later. For now, I have something for you." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper, from the general store in Sweetwater. Curious, Hannah unwrapped the package to find a book, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Her eyes widened in surprise. You mentioned it was your favorite, Jack explained, a hint of color rising in his weathered cheeks. Thought you might like to have a copy of your own. Hannah ran her fingers over the embossed cover, deeply touched by the thoughtful gift. Jack, thank you, this is wonderful. Rosa watched the exchange with knowing eyes and a small smile before tactfully excusing herself to gather more herbs from the pantry. That night, after dinner, Hannah and Jack sat before the fire as a snowstorm raged outside. Hannah read aloud from her new book while Jack whittled a piece of pine wood, his hands moving with practiced precision. You have good taste in literature, Jack commented during a pause. My wife loved that book too. Hannah marked her place with her finger. Tell me about her, your wife. If you don't mind, Jack's hands stilled. For a moment, Hannah thought she had overstepped, but then he began to speak, his voice soft with memory. Her name was Sarah. We grew up together in Kansas. Married young, I was 20, she was 18. Came out here to start the ranch with nothing but a dream in each other. He smiled faintly. She was stubborn as a mule and twice as smart as me, had this laugh that could light up the darkest room. She sounds wonderful, Hannah said gently. She was. Jack resumed his whittling. After she died, I thought about selling up, moving back east, but this place was our dream, not just mine. Couldn't bring myself to let it go. I'm glad you didn't, Hannah said. It's a beautiful home. Jack looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. It's starting to feel like one again. The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Hannah felt her cheeks warm, and she returned her attention to the book, though the words swam before her eyes. As February turned to March, the worst of the winter began to ease. The snow remained deep, but the days grew longer, and the bitter cold relented. Hannah had fully integrated into life at the ranch, earning the respect of the hands with her willingness to work and her quick learning. She had even begun to ride, with Jack teaching her the basics on Thunder, who proved surprisingly gentle with the novice rider. It was during one such riding lesson that the peaceful routine of the ranch was shattered. Hannah and Jack were returning from a ride around the property's perimeter when Hank came galloping toward them, his face grim. Riders coming, Jack, 6 of them, armed, looks like Blackfield's men. Jack's expression hardened. Get back to the house, both of you. Tell the boys to be ready, but no one draws unless I give the word. Hannah felt cold fear grip her heart. Jack, this is my problem, not yours. I should, not another word. Jack cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. This is my land and you're under my protection. That makes it my problem. They rode quickly back to the ranch where the hands were already gathering, rifles in hand. Jack helped Hannah dismount and handed Thunder's reins to one of the younger hands. Get inside, he told her. But please, Hannah. His eyes softened momentarily. I need to know you're safe. Reluctantly, she nodded and retreated to the house, though she positioned herself by the window where she could see what transpired. 6 riders approached the ranch at a leisurely pace, clearly in no hurry and confident in their numbers. Jack stood on the porch, Hank and 3 of the hands flanking him, all armed but with weapons lowered. The lead rider, a man Hannah recognized as Blackfield's foreman, reined in his horse a respectful distance from the house. Afternoon, Norwood. Miller, Jack acknowledged coolly. This is private property. Just passing through, Miller replied with a smirk that suggested otherwise. Mr. Blackfield sends his regards. He's mighty concerned about that young lady you took from Opal, worried about her welfare. Is that so? Jack's voice was deceptively calm. Strange way of showing concern, sending armed men to my ranch, Miller shrugged. Dangerous times, never know what might happen on the trail. His eyes scanned the property, taking in the defensive positions of Jack's men. We heard you might have given shelter to a fugitive, that true? There are no fugitives here, Jack stated flatly, just me and my people. Mr. Blackfield seems to think otherwise, says the Kovacs woman stole from him before running off, substantial sum too. Jack's hand rested casually on his holstered revolver. Mr. Blackfield is mistaken. And he'd do well to keep his grievances off my land. Miller's expression hardened. That sounds like a threat, Norwood. Just a statement of fact. Now, unless you have business with me personally, I suggest you move along. The tension in the air was palpable as the 2 men stared each other down. Finally, Miller tipped his hat. We'll be on our way then, but Mr. Blackfield isn't a man who gives up easily. He'll get what's owed to him one way or another. Nothing is owed, Jack replied coldly. Good day, gentlemen. The riders turned their horses and departed at the same unhurried pace, but the message had been delivered clearly. This was not over. Once they were out of sight, Jack strode into the house to find Hannah white-faced by the window. They'll be back, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe not today, but they'll come back. Jack nodded grimly. I know, but we'll be ready. Jack, I can't let you risk yourself and your men for me. Blackfield is dangerous. So am I when provoked, Jack replied, his jaw set stubbornly. And he's provoked me plenty. Hannah studied his face, the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw. She knew arguing would be futile. Instead, she stepped forward and, before she could lose her courage, pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. Jack stood frozen, surprise evident in his expression. Then, slowly, he raised a hand to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Hannah, he began, his voice rough with emotion. The moment was interrupted by Hank bursting through the door. Jack got smoke rising from the north pasture. Jack's hand fell away as he turned to his foreman. Those bastards, get the men now. The next hours were a blur of activity as Jack and his men fought to contain the fire Blackfield's men had set in the dry grass of the north pasture. Though the surrounding snow prevented it from spreading to the main ranch, a storage shed containing winter feed was lost before they could control the blaze. By nightfall, exhausted and smoke-stained, they returned to the house. Hannah met them with hot coffee and food, having spent the afternoon preparing for their return while watching anxiously for any sign of Blackfield's men coming back. Could have been worse, Hank said, assessing the damage. But it's a message clear enough. Jack nodded, his expression grim. Post extra guards tonight. I wouldn't put it past them to try something else. When the men had gone to their posts, Hannah found Jack alone in his study, staring into a glass of whiskey. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain of her welcome after the interrupted moment earlier. May I come in? She asked softly. Jack looked up, his face softening at the sight of her. Of course. Hannah entered and sat across from him. I'm so sorry, Jack. All of this is because of me. No, he said firmly. It's because Blackfield is a vindictive bully who can't stand being defied. This isn't your fault. Even so, I can't stay here and put you and your men at risk. Hannah took a deep breath. I've decided to leave as soon as the weather permits. Jack set down his glass with more force than necessary. And go where? Denver, perhaps, or San Francisco. Somewhere Blackfield has no reach. Alone, with no money, no connections. Hannah lifted her chin. I managed before. Barely, Jack pointed out. And you nearly died when things went wrong. What would you have me do? Hannah asked, frustration coloring her voice. Stay here and watch as Blackfield destroys everything you've built. Jack rose and came to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me, Hannah. Long before you came here, Blackfield and I had our differences. He's been trying to buy this land for years to expand his mining operations. I've refused every offer. This confrontation was coming one way or another. But I've made it worse. Perhaps, Jack acknowledged, or perhaps you've given me something worth fighting for beyond just land and cattle. Hannah's breath caught at his words and the intensity in his eyes. Jack. I know it hasn't been long, he continued, his voice low and earnest, and I know you have every reason to be cautious about men and their intentions, but these past weeks, having you here, it's brought life back to this place, back to me. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. I felt it too, she admitted, but I'm afraid not of you but of what might happen, of bringing you more trouble. Trouble finds its way to everyone eventually, Jack said with a small smile. I'd rather face it with you than alone. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Hannah didn't withdraw. Instead, she closed the distance between them, meeting his lips with hers in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more needy. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered, not just because of Blackfield, but because this is where you belong. Hannah's heart swelled with emotions she had thought forever beyond her reach after the bitter lessons of Opal. Yes, she said simply, I'll stay. The next morning brought clear skies and the first real hint of spring's approach. It also brought a visitor, Sheriff Davis from Opal, riding alone and looking decidedly uncomfortable as Jack met him in the yard, rifle in hand. "State your business, Sheriff," Jack called, making no effort to hide his hostility. Davis dismounted slowly, hands visible. "I come in peace, Norwood. Need to speak with you and Miss Kovacs." About Warren Blackfield." The sheriff glanced around nervously. "In private, if you don't mind." Jack studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the house. "Inside, but any false moves and you'll regret it." Inside, Hannah stood by the fireplace, tense but composed as the sheriff removed his hat and nodded respectfully to her. "Miss Kovacs." "Good to see you looking well." "What do you want, Sheriff?" she asked directly. Davis sighed heavily. "I owe you an apology, miss. What happened in Opal, it wasn't right. The town failed you and I failed in my duty." Jack and Hannah exchanged surprised glances. "That's unexpected," Jack said cautiously. "What brought on this change of heart?" "Blackfield's gone too far," Davis explained, accepting the coffee Hannah offered. "After his men returned yesterday, he was in a rage, started making plans, talking about burning you out, Norwood. When I objected, he threatened my family." Jack's expression darkened. "That sounds like him." "There's more," Davis continued. "The widow Jenkins came to me last night, said she couldn't keep quiet anymore. Turns out you weren't the first woman Blackfield tried to force himself on, Miss Kovacs. There have been others, mostly young girls working at the hotel, too scared or too dependent on the job to speak out." Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "Those poor girls. The widow's daughter was one of them, 3 years back. Girl was so ashamed she left town, hasn't been heard from since." Davis looked down at his hands. "I should have known, should have done something sooner." "Why tell us this now?" Jack asked, still suspicious. "Because Blackfield's planning something big. I heard him tell his men to make an example of you both. And I may be a coward, but I'm not party to murder." The sheriff straightened. "I've sent a telegram to the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne, but they won't be here for days, maybe longer with the state of the trails." Jack's mind raced with the implications. How many men can Blackfield muster? 15, maybe 20. Some are just minors who owe him, but others are genuine hard cases. Hannah paled. "Jack, that's too many." "Even with your men, we've got the advantage of position," Jack said grimly. "And warning, thanks to the sheriff here." Davis stood. "I should get back before I'm missed, but I wanted you to know what's coming." Jack extended his hand, which the sheriff shook with evident relief. "I appreciate the warning, Davis, and doing the right thing, even if it's late in coming." After the sheriff departed, Jack gathered his men to explain the situation. To his pride, but not his surprise, not one of them suggested abandoning the ranch or handing Hannah over. "We've faced worse odds," Hank declared, to murmurs of agreement from the others. "Blackfield's men are mostly hired guns," one of the older hands added. "They fight for money, not loyalty. They'll break if pushed hard enough." Jack nodded. "We'll fortify what we can and set up watches. If they come, we'll be ready." For the next 2 days, the ranch prepared for siege. Supplies were stockpiled in the main house, defensive positions established, and escape routes planned. Hannah worked alongside the men, her determination to protect her new home matching their own. In the quiet moments between preparations, Jack and Hannah found themselves drawn closer together. The threat hanging over them stripped away pretense, accelerating the growing bond between them. They spoke of the future tentatively at first, then with increasing certainty. A future together, if they survived what was coming. On the 3rd day, as the sun began to set, Hank spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. "They're coming," he announced grimly. "At least 15 riders." Jack nodded, unsurprised. "Get everyone in position. Hannah, I'm staying with you," she said firmly, a rifle in her hands. At his questioning look, she added, "Rosa taught me, said every woman should know how to shoot." Despite the gravity of the situation, Jack smiled. "Remind me to give Rosa a raise." His expression turned serious again. "Stay close to the house. If things go badly, there's a horse saddled in the back. You take it and ride for Sweetwater, understand?" Hannah wanted to argue but recognized the logic in his plan. "I understand, but it won't come to that. We'll win." Jack touched her face gently. "Your confidence is heartening." The riders approached with deliberate slowness, spreading out in a semicircle before the ranch house. Warren Blackfield himself led them, his expensive coat and polished boots incongruous among the rough-looking men surrounding him. Jack stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. "That's far enough, Blackfield." Blackfield reined in his horse, a smug smile on his fleshy face. "Norwood, I see you've been expecting us." Word travels. So does a reputation for being a coward who sends others to do his dirty work. Blackfield's smile faltered. "I've come for what's mine, the girl and compensation for what she stole." "Hannah stole nothing," Jack replied evenly, "and she's not yours or anyone's." "She's a thief and a liar," Blackfield spat, "and you're harboring her illegally." "That's not how Sheriff Davis tells it," Jack countered. "Seems he's had a change of heart about your accusations. Sent for the U.S. Marshal to investigate certain matters in Opal." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackfield's face, quickly replaced by anger. "Davis is a fool who's exceeded his authority." "Maybe," Jack agreed, "or maybe he's finally found his conscience." He shifted his rifle slightly. "Now I suggest you and your men turn around and ride out while you still can." Blackfield laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Look around you, Norwood. You're outnumbered. Be reasonable. Hand over the girl, pay for the damages she caused, and we'll leave you and your ranch in peace." "Not going to happen," Jack stated flatly. Blackfield's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." He raised his hand, preparing to signal his men to attack. "I wouldn't," called a new voice from behind Blackfield's group. All eyes turned to see Sheriff Davis approaching, accompanied by 6 mounted men wearing the distinctive badges of U.S. Marshals. "What is this?" Blackfield demanded, his face flushing with rage. The lead marshal, a tall man with a weather-beaten face, urged his horse forward. "Warren Blackfield, I'm Marshal James Cooper. I have warrants for your arrest on charges of extortion, intimidation, and conspiracy to commit murder." "This is absurd," Blackfield sputtered. "I'm a respected businessman." "These charges are fabricated. We have sworn statements from multiple witnesses," Cooper interrupted calmly, "including several young women from your hotel and a number of minors who were forced to work in unsafe conditions under threat of violence." As the marshal spoke, Blackfield's hired guns began to edge away, clearly reassessing their loyalty in light of federal involvement. Blackfield noticed their retreat and grew more desperate. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted, drawing his pistol and pointing it directly at Jack. "Norwood has turned you all against me." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Blackfield's finger tightened on the trigger. Jack raised his rifle. And from the porch doorway behind Jack, Hannah fired a single shot that struck Blackfield's shoulder, causing his own shot to go wild as he tumbled from his horse. Chaos erupted briefly as marshals and ranch hands alike drew weapons, but it was over in moments. With their employer disarmed and under arrest, Blackfield's remaining men surrendered without resistance. As Marshal Cooper supervised Blackfield being handcuffed and loaded onto a wagon for transport to Cheyenne, Jack turned to Hannah, who still stood on the porch, the rifle now lowered. "That was some shot," he said with quiet admiration. Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she set down the weapon. "I was aiming for his arm," Jack laughed, the sound releasing the tension of the confrontation. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." He climbed the steps to join her on the porch, pulling her into his arms. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "He can't hurt you or anyone else again." Hannah melted against him, relief washing through her. "We won. We did." Jack drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "I meant what I said before, about wanting you to stay. Not just until this was resolved, but permanently." Hannah's heart raced. "What exactly are you asking me, Jackson Norwood?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming Hannah Norwood. If you do me the honor of becoming my wife." Joy bubbled up inside her, so intense it almost hurt. "Are you certain? It's been such a short time. I've never been more certain of anything," Jack interrupted. "When I found you in that cabin, half frozen and still fighting to live, I admired your spirit. As I got to know you, that admiration grew into respect, and then into something much deeper. I love you, Hannah Kovacs, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me." Tears of happiness filled Hannah's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Jack's face lit up with a smile more brilliant than any she had seen from him before. He swept her into his arms and kissed her deeply, heedless of the audience of ranch hands, marshals, and prisoners watching from the yard. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Hannah rested her head against Jack's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. From the brink of death in a forgotten cabin to this moment of perfect happiness, all because one man had chosen compassion over indifference, had built a fire when others had closed their doors. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. Hannah smiled up at him. "I'm thinking that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms. For me, it was a fire at my door on the coldest night of winter." "And for me," Jack replied, "it was finding you." 6 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Hannah Kovacs became Hannah Norwood in a ceremony attended by the entire ranch staff, the residents of Sweetwater, and even Sheriff Davis, who had resigned his position in Opal to become a deputy in Cheyenne. Warren Blackfield had been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. His empire had crumbled, his assets sold to pay restitution to his victims. Opal itself was changing, with new leadership and a determination to atone for its collective failure to protect those Blackfield had targeted. As Jack and Hannah stood on the porch of their home that evening, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From desperation to hope, from loneliness to love, from the edge of death to the beginning of a life fuller and richer than she had ever dared dream. "No regrets?" Jack asked, his arm around her waist. Hannah smiled up at her husband. "Only that we didn't meet sooner." "I don't know," Jack mused. "Maybe we met exactly when we were meant to, when we were both ready to recognize what we'd found." Hannah considered this. "Perhaps you're right, everything in its time." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they remained together on the porch, planning their future, the improvements to the ranch, the children they hoped for, the life they would build together. And in the distance, a lone wolf howled not in loneliness, but in celebration of the wild, untamed beauty of the land they called home. For Hannah, who had once felt the cold grip of death as a town turned its back on her, the sound was a reminder of how quickly fate could change. A reminder that sometimes salvation came in the form of a stranger who chose to build a fire when others closed their doors. A fire that had grown into a blaze of love that would warm them both for all the days to come.